So, back to tonight's presentation. John Grebenkemper, close, okay, is here with us. Along with us is the featured presenter, Caine. John has been here before, and he talked last a couple of years ago, it's been about 3 or 4 or 5 years, about the Donner Party cabin site study you did up there. It was most interesting. His presentations are always spectacular. I think we're going to see a lot of graphics probably, and pictures, and what else?
Lots of pictures.
Lots of pictures, good. So, John, welcome.
See what I got.
Yeah, some trees. You got the microphone.
Yeah.
Good. Yep.
Okay, can you hear me? No, it's not on.
We'll turn it on.
That could explain it.
You can switch on the microphone.
Oh. Switch. Secrets.
You're good.
How's that? Yeah, what Dan didn't mention is this talk is 2 months, it's 2 years and 1 month late. It was originally scheduled for March of 2020, and some strange things seemed to happen around there. So, what I'm going to talk about is in 2017, the dog who's up here being babysat, and I went on an archaeology expedition sponsored by National Geographic Society to look for the human remains of Amelia Earhart. In archaeology, it's always important to understand the history of the site you are investigating, particularly when you're heading off into the Pacific with a dog. It's pretty good to understand that, to have a chance of finding something. So this talk will explore Amelia Earhart's disappearance, how she could have reached Nicaraguan Island, and evidence that indicates she may have died there. And if this all works, we've got the next slide. This is a mystery story. What happened to the famous aviator Amelia Earhart and navigator Fred Noonan when they disappeared on July 2nd, 1937? There have been hundreds of books published about the disappearance, but most of them are more fiction than fact. Many of these books allege that the government is covering up the Earhart disappearance. After an extensive search in July 1937, the Navy concluded that she ran out of fuel and crashed in the ocean. That is certainly believable, considering that she was trying to find an island about a mile in length in the middle of the vast Pacific. This story is an alternative theory. To prove it, this expedition will either have to find human remains with DNA from Amelia Earhart or Fred Noonan, or part of the missing airplane, the Lockheed Electra 10E. By disappearing, Amelia Earhart became more famous than if she had completed the flight around the world. In January 2017, my search group began discussions with the National Geographic Society to bring the search dogs from the Institute of Canine Forensics to an isolated, uninhabited island in the South Pacific. There were some previous archaeology investigations that indicated a Western woman was stranded on this island in the 1930s. While the investigations were suggestive that it could have been Amelia Earhart, there was no positive proof. If the expedition could recover human bones detected by the dogs, they might be able to extract DNA and make a positive identification. It is pretty trivial for a human to fly from the United States into the South Pacific. It is extremely difficult to fly a dog. The area is a rabies-free zone, and no country there allows a dog to enter from the United States without extensive medical tests and a long quarantine. Just getting permission for canine entry is going to be a difficult proposition. We signed a contract with National Geographic to supply 4 handler canine teams for the expedition. National Geographic would pay all the expenses and use their international contacts to help influence the countries involved to allow entry for the dogs. The expedition plan was simple. We take a nonstop flight from LA to Fiji and then hop on a boat for a 5-day, 1,100-mile trip to Nicomeroa Island. As shown on the globe, the flight to Fiji is a long flight that takes 12 hours. There are lots of big questions. How could we get dogs into Fiji? How do you have dogs live on a boat for 3 weeks? Did we get permission to land the dogs on Nicomeroa, which is a World Heritage Site and Wildlife Preserve? Would the chartered boat company allow dogs on board? The last question was the easiest to answer. The charter boat company said they would love to have dogs travel with them, but we could never get permission from the government of Fiji to get them into the country. I don't think they ever suspected they had just committed to carry 4 dogs on their ship. So how do you get dogs into Fiji? There's a 10-page document with lots of subsections that describe all of the medical tests that need to be performed before submitting your application for importing a dog to Fiji by biosecurity. If that is approved, you can then have the animal air freighted into their quarantine facility where it will spend several months before release. Fiji requirements are so strict that dogs from other countries in the rabies-free zone require a minimum quarantine of 10 days. This was not going to be easy since we will not air freight a dog and would not subject them to quarantine. If you want to take a dog to Fiji, expect many visits to the vet for all sorts of tests you have never heard about. The 4 dogs, shown in the picture here, and their handlers, got to know the chief vet very well. The cost per dog was about $3,000. It takes about 3 months to go through the full process and submit your paperwork to Fiji Biosecurity. We also had to deal with an issue of dog food. The only dog food available in Fiji is so bad you wouldn't want to feed it to a human. It is illegal to import dog food from the US, so we couldn't fly it on the plane. However, Fiji would allow us to import it from New Zealand, and New Zealand makes a nice premium dog food. And we had some air freighted into Fiji. The custom duties for that cost us $1,000. We were scheduled to fly to Fiji on June 22nd. Just to keep things interesting, we had a new problem. Fiji Airlines is not permitted to fly animals in the passenger compartment, and we wouldn't put them in luggage. So they had to get special permission from the government. They wanted lots of information about dogs flying in airplanes. And it was just at that time, in a recent incident in the US, a dog had bitten another passenger. The first permit to import livestock into Kiribati arrived on June 6th. She was considered livestock. They didn't have any way of importing dogs. We could land on Nicomeroa with the dogs, but we still needed entry to Fiji, and we were down to a week before departure. I left to drive down to LA, not even being 100% sure that the trip was going to happen. The final approvals came through the day I left for LA. The dogs would be permitted to enter Fiji without quarantine, and Fiji Air was given permission for the dogs to fly in the passenger compartment. I carried several copies of the magic form up there because it proved the dog was legally in Fiji. Meanwhile, National Geographic has sworn us to secrecy about this trip. Until, of course, they did a press release the morning of the flight to Fiji. And, after months of secrecy, it really looked like we were going to get 4 dogs to visit an uninhabited island in the South Pacific. The 4 border collies got their 15 minutes of fame in the newspapers around the world, including places like the UK, leading newspaper, Germany, India, Japan. The word got around. As I walked through the LA airport later that day, a number of people stopped me and the dog and asked if we were the ones flying off to look for Amelia Earhart. When I said yes, they whipped out their phones and took a picture. At the airport, Fiji Air had a special person assigned to escort us through the check-in process. Once they decided they would fly dogs in the airplane, they gave us the VIP treatment. whenever we were flying in one of their planes. We were boarded early, and pictures were taken for the Fiji Airline newsletter of dogs boarding the airplane. 4 dogs were off to travel a quarter way around the world. And this is Kaylee. She goes under the seat in front of me and enjoys herself. The airline even got special pads for the dogs to sleep under the seat for the 12-hour flight. Kelly spent most of the time sleeping, and that's fortunate because there's no doggy bathrooms on the airplane. When the plane arrived in Fiji, Customs had set up a special line just for the 4 dogs, which passed us quickly through the system. The other 250 passengers had to wait in the normal customs line. We spent one night in Fiji at a resort hotel to allow us to somewhat adjust to the time and humidity. It wasn't just hot temperature-wise, but it is really humid. The Reef Endeavor is a 300-foot ship designed to carry 100 passengers and a crew of 50. It is normally used for luxury cruises around Fiji, but this time it would be crossing the open Pacific. Most of the 50 passengers were eco-tourists who paid lots of money for this special trip to visit the island where Amelia Earhart may have died. The island is only open for approved scientific expeditions, and this trip was led by well-known archaeologist Tom Caine, who would supervise further explorations. Well, the island was known as Gardner Island in the days when Amelia Earhart was there. And way up there, we're way down here, we actually did a little detour to drop supplies off at an outlying Fiji island and then on up to Gardner. And it's part of the nation of Kiribati, and now known as Nikumaroro. And for those of you who may not recognize the name Kiribati, it's spelled, people around here say Kiribati. Not true, because in the typewriter where they were doing the official documents for the name didn't have a working S, so they put a TI. The 1,100-mile trip in the boat is equivalent to taking a boat from San Diego to Seattle. The nearest inhabited island from where we were going was 300 miles away with a population of 20. The nearest hospital is 600 miles. If someone was seriously injured, it would take 3 days to get them to the hospital. It isn't like you can just fly a plane up there. There's no place to land it. This is the island. Nikumaroro, 4 miles long, 1 mile wide. The interior lagoon is a shark nursery. The highest point in the island is about 50 feet above sea level, but most of it's about 10 feet. This is not a tropical paradise. There is no flowing fresh water in the island, and the only inhabitants are birds and crabs. Nikumaroro is so isolated that more people have been on the top of Mount Everest than on this island. And I'll read it. You probably can't read the cartoon, but it says the boat is labeled the Amelia Earhart Recovery Project. The first person says, "This could be her very last message to the world. What does it say?" The answer is, it's a scathing review on TripAdvisor. So Amelia Earhart was aiming for an island called Holland, which is way up there at the top of the map. And, you know, how could she end up down here? Well, that's what we'll explore. I mean, Gardner Island is 400 miles to the south-southeast. And we have to really look at the history of the flight to understand how she could have gotten there. The original plan was for Amelia Earhart and navigator Fred Noonan to take off from Ley, New Guinea in the morning, and they would arrive at Holland Island the next morning. So it's a long flight, 2,560 miles to be exact between the 2 points, and require about 18 hours of flying time if there were no headwinds. They would pass over several small island chains that had never seen an airplane. The landing strip in Holland had been specially built by the U.S. government for this flight. The Lockheed Electra 10E was a commercial airplane that would seat 12 passengers. Lockheed had modified it for Earhart by converting the passenger compartment into a fuel tank. The plane carried 1,150 gallons of gasoline, which weighs about 7,000 pounds. That gave the airplane a flying endurance of 24 hours. Kelly Johnson, leader of Skunk Works Spain, calculated the exact power settings and altitude to give the maximum range. They were provided to Amelia Earhart as the recommended operating conditions for the long flight. Fred Noonan on the right would serve as navigator, for which he had considerable experience for Pan American Airlines and the Pacific Clipper fleet. Next to him is Harry Manning, who was the Pacific portion of the flight, both as navigator and radio operator. When the flight was delayed because of an aircraft accident, he had to drop out, leaving just Earhart and Noonan on the entire flight. This is the photo of the Electra taking off from Oakland. If you see there's a little antenna up here, a loop antenna. That's a radio direction finding antenna that steer the plane into small islands in the Pacific. When Manning dropped out, neither Earhart or Noonan were experienced with operating the radio direction finding equipment or sending Morse code on the radio transmitter. Both of these skills would prove to be major issues on this flight. This is the last known film of Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan taking off from Lae, New Guinea. The plane departed about 10 in the morning local time, which is really convenient because that's 0 hours Greenwich Mean Time. Using local time in this flight is difficult because half-hour time zones, the international date line, and lots of time zones. So always give times in GMT, which is the elapsed flying time. And that's the last known photograph. Navigating to a small island in the middle Pacific was a difficult task. During the nighttime, when there wasn't cloud cover, you could determine your latitude with star observation. Longitude was more difficult. The flight was set up so that sunrise would occur about an hour before the plane reached Holland Island. You could then measure the exact time of sunrise, and that gave you the distance from the arc shown by the yellow line, which is called the line of position. And what you do, if you were determined you were here, you knew how long to fly, and then you could go either north or south to get to the island as long as you guessed right, or you could zigzag back and forth until you finally got to it. And you'll hear line of position mentioned several times. So what they did was they flew and, they would determine their, when sunrise was, get their longitude and fly to the line of position. And we don't know which way they turned, whether they turned to the right or to the left. Earhart reported by radio a position near Nikumanu Island at 0718 GMT. So it's Nikumanu, it's right there. Her reported flying altitude was 8,000 feet, which agrees with the Kelly-Johnson recommendations. This computes to an average ground speed of 125 miles per hour. The position report and time is exactly local sunset, so Noonan apparently have been able to measure longitude from the setting sun. At 10:30 GMT, they were flying in the darkness. Earhart reported by radio she could see a ship below. That's this position here. The deck watch on the SS Myrtleback reported to the bridge that he could hear an airplane. This would be a highly unusual event so far from land. The position of the Myrtleback shows that the average ground speed was 135 miles per hour, and Earhart was close to her desired course, more than halfway through the flight. This is the last known position that we have any confidence of the Earhart flight. The Coast Guard cutter Itasca was moored at Holland Island to provide support for Earhart's plane. They had radio direction finding equipment transported to Holland Island to provide final guidance into the island. The radio room had been listening to Earhart's transmissions as she transited the Pacific Ocean towards Holland. These radio transmissions provide what happened, give clues to what happened on the morning of July 2nd. So the local time on Highland Island is 11.5 hours earlier in GMT. So, again, all the times are in GMT, which is the elapsed flight time. And as I said at the beginning, they have 24 hours of flying time in the airplane. So Earhart sends a message at 1811 GMT. Please take bearings on us and report in half an hour. I will make noise and might about 100 miles out. And there's an S4 in parentheses, or brackets. The number of brackets is the signal strength on a scale of 1 to 5. S4 is a pretty strong signal. A little later, about almost a little over an hour later, she's AHAQQ calling Itasca. We must be on you, but cannot see you. But gas is running low. Been unable to reach you by radio. We are flying at 1,000 feet. And gives the radio operator gives the strongest possible signal report at S5. Gas running low indicates that she was getting close to her reserve level, which is about 4 hours of flying time. At 1,000 feet indicates there may have been local clouds forcing her down. The Itasca reported 20-mile visibility and no cloud cover at this time. The signal strength was so strong, the radio operator thought she would be landing soon. And then we have a message coming in a little bit later at 1930 GMT, KHAQQ calling Itasca. We received your signals, but unable to get a minimum. Please take a bearing on us and answer 3105 of voice. And that's their transmitting frequency they were using then. The minimum indicates that she was using radio direction finder but couldn't get a bearing from it. Earhart and Noonan's lack of experience using the RDS is becoming a problem. However, the Itasca has a radio direction finder in Holland to provide guidance. The crew running it has been listening to Earhart transmissions all night, and at this critical time, the batteries have run down and they can provide no directional guidance. Holland Island is small, only about a mile in length. There are no trees, which makes it difficult to see at low altitude. And we know Earhart reported she was at 1,000 feet. So this is what Holland would look at 1,000 feet, 10 miles out. It's right in here, but you can't see much. Google Earth is so nice what you could do on it. And that's one of the reasons why radio direction finding is so important to locate an island. At 2 miles out, yeah, you can easily see the island. However, in 1937, navigating an airplane to within 2 miles of your destination after a 2,500-mile flight across the ocean was an impossible task. Well, this is the last radio transmission that was ever received. We are on the line of position 157337, the line of position I showed you earlier, what they would fly along to look for the island. We'll repeat this message. We will repeat this message on 6210 kilocycles. Wait, listening on 6210 kilocycles. We are running north-south. Again, the signal report was reported as S5. And they're changing over frequencies because they normally use 6210 kilocycles for daytime transmissions. So they're flying along the line of position both north and south. They switch their daytime frequency to 6210, but Itasca can't hear them and request Earhart to switch back to 3105. There is no further response heard from the plane. With no word for 1.5 hours, the Itasca declares the Earhart plane is missing. The Navy sends a message requesting all commercial and military ships to monitor the Earhart frequencies. Earhart missing is a major story around the world, and soon there are numerous reports from people hearing Earhart in their radios requesting help. The vast majority of these reports are hoaxes or wishful thinking of what they heard when they would hear the noise and the noisy hiss between radio stations. The only radio reports I trust are the ones that came from the commercial or military stations. There are a number of credible reports from these stations, And the only way Earhart could transmit if her plane had landed intact on an island. And this is a whole listing of reports over a several-day period. These are commercial, both military and commercial stations in the Pacific hear transmissions on Earhart's primary frequency at 3105. There are no other licensed transmitters in the Pacific on this frequency. This is the strongest evidence that Earhart's plane survived the flight and landed intact, and especially when they're receiving these signals, several days after she's disappeared. Itasca hears a transmission that evening, the evening she disappeared. The radio operator recognizes Earhart's voice and asks her to send dashes that are heard by 3 other stations. 2 days later in the early evening, Honolulu broadcast station KGMB asked Earhart to send 4 dashes, which are heard by Pan Am and Coast Guard stations in Hawaii. KGMB repeats their 4-dash request a half hour later, and dashes are heard in American Samoa. Over the next 6 hours, there are various reception reports. All of these transmissions were at night in the Pacific. The Pan Am stations have radio direction finding equipment for receiving signals, and was used for their navigating the Pan Am Clipper fights across the Pacific Ocean. The Holland Island Art radio direction finder also was able to get a bearing. All of these bearings point to one area of the Pacific. And the only way those radio transmissions could occur is the aircraft landed intact. The radio transmitter requires one aircraft engine to run to keep the battery charged. And the multiple radio direction finding bearings indicate the plane is somewhere in the vicinity of the Phoenix Islands, then in British possession. Most of the Phoenix Islands are uninhabited. So here we have, on a modern map, radio direction finding signals that they can find from all of the stations today. And you can see most of them converge in this area a little south of the equator. You'll get some. Radio direction finding is pretty tricky. If you're trying to make a signal minimum, but if the signal's weak, it's very hard to get the direction. So you can get a fair bit of error. So the question is, did the Navy do a thorough search along the Phoenix Islands? So why didn't they? All of these bearings are available today, but what did the Navy know in 1937? And we can answer that question. This is a map from the Navy headquarters at Pearl Harbor, maintained by Admiral Murphy's command. The last entry on the map is July 10th, and it shows Earhart's flight path from Ley to Holland. It shows the line of position, which is Earhart's last known bearing. It shows the position of the SS Myrtleback, so they knew that, about that being heard. And it shows bearings of some of the RDF reports. The map didn't go below the equator, so they taped handwritten addition below the equator, and those happen to be where the Phoenix Islands are, and Gardner is on this hand-drawn one. We'll see it better in a couple of other pictures here. So this is the map off the Navy map that shows the line of position that the Navy knew about. The RDF bearings the Navy had on their map are, oops, do that, let's go back. You can see them in red here, and they're all crossing down in this area. And if we look here, we expand that out, well, what do we have? There's the line of position she was supposedly following. The RDF bearings cross a little over here, but not that far away from Gardner Island, not too far from the Caine Island. So considering the accuracy, you would assume that they're transmitting on Gardner or McKean. And we also see in this map, there's the USS Colorado, which is part of the search group, and that's their position on July 8th. Colorado carried 3 seaplanes that could launch from a catapult and search the islands for the missing plane. On July 9th, these seaplanes searched McKean and Gardner. They report that McKean is too small to land an airplane, but a plane could easily land on the lagoon on Gardner. The lead pilot's report states, "Here signs of recent habitation were clearly visible, but repeated circling and zooming failed to elicit any answering wave from possible inhabitants, and it was finally taken for granted that none were there." Well, Gardner did have no inhabitants at this point. The island is 4 miles long, covered in thick tropical vegetation. The planes were flying at 400 feet. At that height, seeing a single person along 10 miles of beach would be difficult, and the interior is so thick you couldn't see through it. The total land area of Gardner is about 1,200 acres. Lambert, the head pilot there, could have landed his planes in the lagoon. In his report he states, "The lagoon at Gardner looks sufficiently deep and certainly large enough so that a seaplane or even an airboat could have landed on or taken off in any direction with little of any difficulty. Given a chance, it is believed that Miss Earhart could have landed her plane in this lagoon and swam or waded ashore." And the Colorado search planes took a photograph of Gardner here. The tide is high. If an airplane had landed on the beach or reef, it might have been washed away by this time by the high tide. Research shows that the tide in Gardner was extremely low on the day Earhart disappeared. It stayed low for several days afterwards. This is called a neap tide and happens regularly in the Pacific. Why didn't the Navy conduct a ground search? Captain Friedel, commanding the USS Colorado, was placed in charge of the search by Admiral Murfin and left Pearl Harbor on July 3rd. While on his way to Holland, Captain Friedland was told about the RDF reports that Earhart's plane had to be on land and ordered to search the Phoenix Islands. On July 9th, the Colorado launched the 3 seaplanes to survey McKean and Gardner. The Colorado proceeded to Gardner and actually drove along the north coast and took bearings on the island as they passed it. The Colorado then proceeded east to the rest of the Phoenix Islands, and the seaplanes landed in the lagoon at Hull Island when they saw native huts. On July 11th, Colorado was released from search duty. The Navy never did a ground search at either McKean or Gardner. Since they couldn't find Earhart, they concluded that she was lost at sea. A few decades later, the Earhart books started appearing. The theory that she was captured by the Japanese on Marshall Island gained a large following. At the time they were flying near Holland Island, they only had enough fuel to travel another 630 miles, whereas the Marshall Islands are 850 miles from Holland. The Itasca radio reports and Earhart's own navigation indicates that she was flying on the line of position near Holland. Now we go to the next phase of this story. In 1938, the British decided to move settlers from the Gilberts into the Phoenix Islands, including Gardner. Yes, the project was really called PISS. The first exploration of Gardner was on October 12, 1937, only 3 months after Earhart disappeared. The expedition explored Gardner for 3 days and decided it was a suitable location for a settlement. The settlement started late 1938, and by 1939 there were 23 people living on Gardner. The Coast Guard Loran Station occupied the southeastern end of the island during World War II. The island could not support even a small population without assistance and was abandoned in 1963. However, a most interesting telegram was sent by Gerald Gallagher, the British manager of the PISS settlements. This is a copy of the original telegram. Gallagher On Gardner, dated September 23rd, 1940. It created yet another mystery to be solved. And if we zoom in, and I will read the interesting part of it. Some months ago, a working party on Gardner discovered human skull. This was buried and only recently heard about it. Thorough search has now produced more bones, including lower jaw, part of a shoe, a bottle, a sexton's box. It would appear that skeleton, possibly that of a woman. Shoe was a woman's and probably size 10. Bones look more than 4 years old to me, but there seems to be very slight chance that this may be the remains of Amelia Earhart. If United States authorities find the above evidence fits into the general description, perhaps they could supply some dental information, as many teeth are intact. I'm holding latest finds for present, but have not exhumed skull. These words were written 3 years, a little more than 3 years after Earhart disappeared. Second Gallagher telegram provides more details. Skull discovered by working party 6 months ago. Report reached me early September. Working party buried skull, but made no further search. Bones were found on southeast corner of island, about 100 feet above the ordinary high water springs. Body obviously been lying under a wren tree, and remains of fire, turtle, dead birds appear to indicate life. All small bones have been removed by the giant coconut crabs, which have also damaged larger ones. This shows that at least one person lived and died on Gardner for a period of time before 1938. They appear to be in a survival mode, cooking locally available wildlife on an open fire. And this is a diagram of the bones that were found, of the 13 bones in 1940. The bones were sent to Fiji and measured by a person not trained in forensics. The bones then disappeared during World War II, and multiple searches have failed to find their current location. Recent work with the initial measurements indicate that they could be consistent with someone of Amelia Earhart's stature. However, they also could fit the stature of millions of other people. Not great proof. Nothing of interest happens for the next 50 years. In 1989, two old navigators suggested to a group called TIGER, which stands for the International Group for Historic Aircraft Recovery, that they should look for Amelia Earhart airplane in the Phoenix Islands because of the radio direction finding measurements from 1937. The search of Caine Island showed that a plane couldn't have landed on the island intact. It didn't have enough, couldn't landed on Caine Island intact. If it didn't land intact, it couldn't transmit radio messages. The exploration of Nuku'alofa was inconclusive, but it was a big island and it couldn't be fully explored in one trip. The Gallagher telegrams were found in the old Western Pacific High Commission files in England and Tarawa in 1997. This led to an extensive search for the location at which the bones were found. In 1941, U.S. Navy aerial photo identified a cleared area in the southeast corner of the island. This is likely the area cleared by Gallagher searching for additional bones and artifacts. So they started doing archaeology trips down there. And they extensively explored this site in 2001, 2007, and 2010. The area was cleared of vegetation and shown in this aerial photograph, and numerous artifacts were found and curated. The ocean is on the right-hand side and the lagoon on the left. The strip of land is about 600 feet wide at this point. And here we go. We have what some of the archaeology has shown. We have fire pits where food could have been cooked. We have these features here, which indicate pits where clams were cooked. Bird bone scatter indicates where bones from the birds were thrown after being consumed. The M1 cartridges are from the Coast Guard that was stationed in the nearby Loran facility. There are also a number of artifacts recovered from the 1930s where they were manufactured in the U.S. Zipper slide was found at a site. It was manufactured between 1933 and 1938. Bottle of Campania Italian Balm hand lotion manufactured in Batavia, Illinois in the 1930s. Advertisements from the 1930s indicate the product was primarily marketed to women. A tree labeled Big Red could be where the bones were found in 1940. So there. So let's look at some of the artifacts. Here's a mirror glass from a woman's compact was found at the site. The lower left photo shows a compact owned by Amelia Earhart from the Purdue University collection. The upper left is the pieces of glass recovered on Nicomaroro. Mass spectrometer analysis of the red rouge shows that the Earhart compact matched flakes of red material found on the mirror glass of Nicomaroro. So you can see there's two spectrometer matching there. The compact from the collection, there was an Earhart compact of 18 pieces of glass they found. A jar found at the site matches a 1930s jar of Dr. Berry's freckle cream. Love this stuff. Amelia Earhart had freckles, and sometimes it was quoted as people said she didn't like having freckles. The major component of freckle ointment is mercury. The test of the jar found in Nicomaroro shows mercury adhering to the glass. Well, we have some interesting indications that, yes, maybe Amelia Earhart could have ended up on Nicomaroro Island. The radio direction finding indicates that the plane landed somewhere in the Phoenix Islands on July 2nd, 1937. The evidence from Nicomaroro shows at least one person died on the island before 1938. The archaeology shows that one or more people who purchased products in the U.S. were marooned in Nicomaroro Island in the 1930s. And one of those stranded castaways was likely a woman. There's enough circumstantial evidence to justify taking the dogs on a voyage to the South Pacific. The dogs can identify the exact location where the person died on Nicomaroro Island and left a skeleton in 1940. The archaeologists expect that to be near the wren tree that they have extensively explored since 2001. Well, let's get on what a sea voyage is like. A 5-day voyage across the Pacific is a little boring for a dog. You can watch the waves rocking the boat for only so long. And the boat does rock. This boat's not stabilized. I can't walk a straight line across the deck, but the dog is unfazed by it and probably wonders what's wrong with the human. But yes, you know, it's just water going by you. And the tropic has lots of clouds and rain showers. It can be pouring on you for a few minutes and then the sun returns. I mean, this is, I already mentioned it, but we're about this point, 5 degrees south of the equator. And this is Nicomaroro Island as we arrived to it 5 days after we left Fiji. It's flat with lots of forest. The water temperature is 85, and that keeps the air near the same temperature. And you can see it's just low, but it's covered in vegetation. So here's an aerial view of the island from the drone. Over here we have the Reef Endeavor, so a 300-foot ship. Doesn't quite show up too well here in the low resolution, but there's a little launch here going into the landing channel. So what we do is we get off the ship, hop on a little boat, travel in here, and then we disembark, which could be interesting at times when the waves were up. And we hike across the island over to here, where we had another boat station that could drive us down to the southeast end of the island to look where all the archaeology work had been done. So the camera crew, National Geographic also brings along the film crew because they want to record all of this in case anything interesting happens. So the camera crew is rolling. Kelly's up here in her orange life vest next to me. And there's another view as we leave the ship, and there are a couple of the dogs visible in this one. Again, So the landing channel was blasted through the coral when the island was still inhabited. Otherwise, it would be a very dangerous journey across the coral reef. This day, the tide is low and the waves small. In 2015 expedition, a landing craft flipped in the channel and nearly drowned one of the passengers. So this can be kind of rough to get in at times. We got a naughty dog up here. Kelly, down. And stay there. Just like a kid. So the boat drives up against the coral, and the landing crew, the Fiji landing crew, will help hold it steady while you unload. And here Kelly's about to unload from the boat. The Fiji crew was very helpful in getting everyone on and off safely. During the entire expedition, there were only a few minor injuries from coral. Cut you real nicely. I got one of them. Took a slip on the reef. So Nicaragua Island is part of the Phoenix Island Protected Area World Heritage Site. The island is only open to scientific investigations with Kiribati personnel required in every expedition to the island. They put up the warning sign. I know it isn't quite that easy to enforce because it's so far in the middle of nowhere. The first day we took the dogs ashore to see how well they could do in the heat and humidity. We took them to a small burial area from the British occupation. The temperature was generally in the mid-80s day and night. The humidity varied from 70% up to 97%. It is far worse than anything I've ever experienced in humid places like Florida. Other than panting more, the dogs seemed to do fine. All 4 dogs had no trouble finding these graves near the landing channel, and Kelly sits to indicate she has detected human remains scent. For a dog cooped up in an airplane and boats for a week, moving critters were of great interest. I don't know, there's a little, how well it shows up, there's a little crab right there she's staring at. In fact, maybe you can see this one crawling along. That was very interesting. The dog's at the top of a rock staring down at that crab as it crawls along. Well, that's a strawberry crab. It's common on the island. Oh, here's a nice little critter here. I don't even recognize that. It's called a Pacific rat. It's a non-native species on the island. They have tried to exterminate them on several of the Phoenix Islands, but it's hard to kill the entire population. When one ran in front of Kelly, she decided it should be exterminated and took off after it. I had to call her back because the permit didn't allow the dogs to disturb wildlife, even unwanted ones. Ah, the coconut crab. It's top of the predators in the island. They can grow to more than a foot wide, and their claws can crack coconuts. They will climb trees and eat birds. You don't want to let the dog's nose get near one of these critters. And lots of bird life. It's a baby booby bird. Yeah, Kelly had a nice view of Mama and the baby, who didn't really seem very concerned about the dog. You know, the mom and Chip were the same area. Every day we walked by them going to the boat to go down and coming back from the boat to go back to the ship. And they just stay there. They didn't care that, you know, dogs and humans were walking along. They really hadn't seen any, and, you know, they weren't a threat. We would catch the boat on the southeast end of the island from this beach. The central lagoon is a shark nursery, so you didn't necessarily want to take a swim with the dog on this lovely sand beach. The ride across the lagoon is about 3 miles. It's a lot nicer riding in a boat than hiking for miles along the shoreline in high humidity. Kelly enjoyed sitting in the boat ride and getting attention as usual. At the southeast end of the island, we would wade ashore. There's no outlet to the ocean at this end, so I was told there's about a foot of bird guano at the bottom of the lagoon. I really didn't want to let the dog walk in that. You know, she'd been on coral, I had cut her foot or something, get an infection. So I got one of the Fiji men to carry Kelly ashore the first day. After I found it wasn't that bad, I did it. In Fiji, local dogs are not friendly. When the Fiji crew first encountered Caine, they would ask if she would bite them. I told them no, but they were still concerned. By the second day of the voyage, they would approach me and ask to pet Caine. By the third day, when we walked across the lounge area of the deck, they would shout, "Caine!" and start taking selfies of themselves with her. The prime goal of the search was to determine where the person found by Gallagher died. The first day we worked with the brush still uncleared. Caine squirmed into the foliage and alerted several times. I would mark her alerts with pink flags, but I had no idea where we were in the jungle. And you can kind of see it's just a thick mess of stuff to work through there. We only had 2 dogs working it that day because of the thickness of the vegetation. One of Caine's pink flags indicates the presence of human remains then. It was an emotional experience for the archaeologists to watch. Some of them had tears in their eyes. They had worked at this site for more than a decade. Caine and one other dog had confirmed their expectation that this was the site where possibly Amelia Earhart had died. One of Caine's alerts on the first day was near the big wren tree. We had multiple alerts in this area. If the person had died under the big wren tree, they would have been dismembered by the coconut crabs and body parts scattered over a wide area. Each of these body parts would leave a scent in the soil, so we did not expect to get all the alerts just at the spot where the person died. Now the work crew had to clear the site so we could bring the rest of the dogs in and do a more thorough search. The scapola grows very thickly together, and it's impossible for a dog or human to pass any distance into it. If you don't want people to get into the area, this is the plant for you. The video shows a path that was cut through the scapola to the ocean several hundred feet from the wren tree site. And walked around the path, you know, a couple 100, 200 feet from wren tree site over to the ocean. And you'd cut out and suddenly from this thick canopy surrounding you, you'd be out and have a nice view of the Pacific Ocean. And this is looking across the ocean towards North America. And, I mean, was this a view that Amelia Earhart saw in her last days of her life? If she was there, yeah. The next day, Caine worked last since the other dogs hadn't worked the site the previous day. This day we had the 97% humidity, and Caine was even panting, lying in the shade while waiting her turn to work. Her alert here is near another dog's alert flag. As I said, we got multiple alerts scattered around because of the body parts being dismembered by the coconut crabs. And So if Amelia Earhart died in Grebenkemper, Island, this is where she died. This is the base of the big wren tree, which would be a prime target for the archaeologists as they dug in the soil to get human remains. And all the dogs indicated this was the strongest scent at the site. The human bone might yield DNA which could prove who died here. The yellow and red flags indicate the other dogs had alerted at this spot before Kelly arrived. Another view of the base of the tree as the excavation work began. And you can see we cleared the area out pretty nicely. You can walk around it. So, watching an archaeologist dig is like watching a dog search. It is very boring until something interesting is found. Every object has to be carefully examined to make sure it isn't a human bone. And that isn't necessarily the easiest thing to do. Here's a test. Your job is to identify the human bone among all of the coral rubble that forms the island. Anyone see a human bone in there? The correct answer is there are no human bones in the picture, but many pieces of coral that look exactly like small human bones. For a week, the archaeologists and volunteer helpers kept digging at various sites where the dogs had alerted. They never did find any human bones. As a last-ditch effort, the archaeologists took soil samples to analyze for human DNA. A few years ago, scientists at the Max Planck Institute in Germany developed a method to recover 50,000-year-old Neanderthal DNA from soil in caves. And so we gathered the soil and they did the analysis. I have been told that the analysis in the U.S. indicated the soil samples did contain human DNA, but it was too degraded to link to an individual. So after, must have been a week and a half on Nicomaroro, we departed as the sun set for the long journey back home. The dogs had accomplished their task successfully. They found where the person died. The owners of the ship and Fiji Airlines were surprised how well behaved the dogs were on this adventure. I flew back sitting next to the chief pilot of Fiji Air. He told me that they originally had a lot of concerns about flying dogs inside the cabin. They were immensely surprised and impressed by how well behaved the dogs were on the trip. Most of the passengers never even knew there were dogs in the airplane until the captain announced it during the flight. There wasn't a single bark during the entire 12-hour flight. That is it. Kelly approves of the presentation.
John?
Yes.
In the radio log that you were showing for her last location, the Pan Am sites, were those, you said those were the Clipper station?
Yeah, the Pan Am Clipper
relay
flights.
station?
So there was one on Midway, one on Guam, and one on Wake. And they all had radio direction finding reports on Earhart's transmission, or the transmission, I should say, in 3105 kilocycles, which was Earhart's frequency. Yes.
I have two questions. It's one of the theories is that in those days, I read a book, Lady Be Good, what was the name of that? About that B-24 that crashed in the desert in North Africa. They said they overfly some of those early radio stations, and they don't go right to it. They start circling it, and somehow they make that mistake. Was that one of the theories? And the other theory, what about Noonan? I read somewhere that he was an alcoholic, and that might have contributed to errors.
There have been, I'll start off with the second part. There have been questions about Noonan and whether he got out and, had parties while they were, staying in various places. He seemed to be competent when they were flying. He clearly got them very close to Holland Island. You never would have had the strong radio signals without that. There's also an interesting, I didn't mention it, is the fact that the position of Holland Island they had in those days was 6 miles off, which 6 miles away from where it actually is. So that error might have contributed some to missing it.
But they found what appears to be a female corpse, but they didn't find a male corpse in that area.
Yeah, well, we're not positive it's a female corpse, it's suggestive. But one of the things you can think about, if two people are marooned together, the first person to die might actually get buried somewhere. And you might not have evidence, and we could, of course, go search 1,200 acres in those jungle conditions. So the second person that died would not be buried and be left on the surface. So it's hard to say. I mean, the evidence certainly indicates that, you know, it was likely a woman down there at the site we searched. But again, unless we could really get solid proof, you can't prove this.
Were you allowed to take any bones when you found
No. Well, to take
any bones belonging to the corpse?
oh no, those have disappeared. Those disappeared in World War II. If those bones were available, they'd be very quickly analyzed for DNA these days.
Or any of the artifacts that they traced?
Well, those are all curated back in the U.S., so they're properly preserved under archaeology standards.
Is there any way they have serial numbers or anything like that?
Nothing that they've ever been able to trace. As for your first question on circling around, I don't know. I mean, if you're doing radio direction finding from an airplane into a site, yes, you may end up circling and you'll get several directions to the bearings, and then you can plot the direction you should fly.
That's how they figured the lady did it. I'm lost.
Did you mention earlier that there was no fresh water on that island?
There's nothing running. There are some springs. On the trip we were on, another group was working in a different part of the island, actually found freshwater pools that accumulate from rain. So it is possible to get fresh water on the island, but you have to look hard to find it.
I see.
And it is, by the way, at that site we searched at, you know, according to the Gallagher telegram, there is a freshwater spring in that area at that time.
Are there archaeologists still working there?
No, it's a very expensive trip to do. I mean, this generally, to do a trip over there, you're in $1 million range. And since this one didn't succeed, this was sort of a next to last attempt. They did do one other thing in 2019, where they actually brought in the fellow that found the Titanic, and he did a big underwater survey looking for the plane.
I think you just answered my question. They found no sign of any remnants of a plane at all, have
Right,
they?
when they searched the ocean floor. But they only searched on one side of the island. And I know why they searched there. It's a long story, but, and yeah, it could, the reef there is actually very flat. With the neap tide would have been above water, it could have served as a landing spot. But that doesn't prove that the plane landed there. There could have been other places at that low tide they landed. Other questions?
Oh, I've got a question.
Yeah?
For $1 million, how was the food on that 10-day cruise on that?
Very good. Well, it was more than 10 days. I mean, we were gone over 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Most of that was either on the ship or,
And what was the crew to passenger ratio? I think you mentioned it. So 100 crew?
well, there normally are 100 passenger and probably crew about the same amount.
Okay.
Well, they had the full crew, so we had a quite good service.
Okay.
No, I mean, it's actually designed for the ship. This boat does luxury cruises around Fiji.
Except no stabilizers on it.
Yeah, but if you're around Fiji, you're in you're not out in the ocean, and you're not
Right.
rocking as bad.
Well, Don, would you do the honors of pulling the winning ticket for tonight's raffle? Get your tickets out. Yeah, ooh.
Throwing the ball.
Could be yours.
All right, who wants their ticket picture?
Okay, we got a red ticket, you're in the running.
They're all,
656-3621. 621. Do we have a winner? Congratulations. Well, hope to see you next month. We're going to have some refreshments here afterwards. If you're feeling kind of buff and strong tonight, if we could put some chairs in stacks of about 6 each, I think, that'd be great. We could move some away from the refreshment area, that'd be even better. So, thanks for coming, and see you next month.